In today's fast-paced world, finding peace can often feel challenging. However, the timeless wisdom of the Buddha reminds us that true tranquility lies within. Buddha stories, motivational and calming for the mind, brings inspiring tales from the Buddha's life, offering valuable lessons that uplift, soothe, and guide you toward inner peace. These stories help you overcome challenges, reduce stress, and find harmony, showing that calmness begins in the mind and can transform your life. 1. The Buddha and the glass of water. One day, a man approached the Buddha and said, "Lord, I have many troubles in my life. I feel constantly overwhelmed by the stresses of work, relationships, and all the problems that seem to come my way. I do not know how to handle these burdens. Can you help me find peace?" The Buddha, known for his wisdom and understanding, smiled gently and said, "I will show you a way to understand your troubles." He then took a glass of water from a nearby table, held it in front of the man, and asked, "How heavy do you think this glass of water is?" The man looked at the glass and said, "It is not very heavy, Lord. I would say it is just a few ounces." The Buddha nodded and continued, "Yes, that may be true. But what would happen if I held this glass of water for a few minutes?" The man thought for a moment and replied, "It would not be much trouble, Lord. I would not feel any discomfort if you held it for a short time." The Buddha smiled again and asked, "And what if I held this glass for an hour?" The man replied, "It would start to become uncomfortable, Lord. My arm would begin to ache." "Very well," said the Buddha. "What if I held it for an entire day?" The man now looked concerned. "That would be unbearable. My arm would be in great pain, and I would not be able to hold the glass any longer." The Buddha then set the glass down on the table and said, "Exactly. The glass itself does not change in weight, yet the longer I hold on to it, the more it causes me pain and discomfort. This is how it is with our worries, our anger, our anxieties, and our attachments. They are like this glass of water. If we hold on to them for a short time, they may not trouble us much. But if we carry them around for too long, they begin to weigh us down and cause us great suffering." Moral of the story: the Buddha's teaching with the glass of water serves as a powerful reminder of the importance of releasing our burdens, whether they are worries, regrets, or negative emotions. By practicing mindfulness and non-attachment, we can let go of these heavy feelings before they overwhelm us. Life is full of challenges, but the Buddha's wisdom shows us that we can choose not to carry the weight of those challenges unnecessarily. The story encourages us to recognize that much of our suffering comes from holding on to things for too long. Like the glass of water, the weight of our troubles is often not as significant as it seems at first, but it becomes unbearable when we carry them for too long without letting go. Through mindfulness, we can learn to release these burdens and live more freely, peacefully, and in the present moment. 2. The Buddha and the Flower Sermon. One day, the Buddha gathered his disciples for a teaching. On this particular occasion, instead of delivering a lecture or explaining the Dharma through words, the Buddha did something unexpected. He sat in front of the assembly of monks and held up a single lotus flower. The flower was fresh, vibrant, and beautiful, but Buddha said nothing. He simply gazed at the flower, and the monks sat in silence, waiting for the Buddha to speak and explain its significance. The Buddha's disciples, each trying to understand what the Buddha was trying to convey, looked around, puzzled and silent. waiting for the Buddha's words. However, there was one disciple who did not react with confusion. Mahakassapa, one of the Buddha's closest disciples, looked at the flower and smiled. His smile was not one of mere amusement, but a smile of deep realization, a smile of understanding that came from within. It was a sign that he had directly grasped the essence of what the Buddha was conveying without needing words. The Buddha, noticing Mahakassapa's smile, said, "I have the eye of the true law, the seal of the Dharma, and I transmit it to Mahakassapa." This marked a profound moment in Buddhist history. The Buddha did not simply give a verbal sermon. Instead, he transmitted wisdom in a form that transcended words, a silent transmission through the flower. Mahakassapa's smile indicated that he had understood the profound truth of the flower, not through intellectual understanding but through a direct intuitive realization. Moral of the story: the transmission of Dharma beyond words. The flower sermon emphasizes that true wisdom and the essence of Dharma cannot be fully captured by language or conceptual thought. The Buddha's silent gesture of holding up the flower was a direct transmission of his insight. Words and concepts are limited in their ability to convey the true nature of reality. Thus, the story encourages a direct experience of wisdom beyond intellectual comprehension. Nonverbal communication. The Buddha's holding of the flower and Mahakassapa's smile symbolize a deeper form of communication, one that doesn't rely on words, but on direct perception and intuition. In Zen Buddhism, this is known as mind-to-mind transmission or direct pointing to the mind. It is a way of teaching that transcends logic and intellect, aiming at a direct experience of enlightenment. Zen and the direct experience of truth. The story is especially significant in Zen Buddhism, where emphasis is placed on direct insight and awakening rather than reliance on scriptures or elaborate discourses. In Zen, the flower sermon represents the idea that true realization can occur in an instant through a sudden, direct experience of reality. The smile of Mahakassapa has come to represent the Zen idea of sudden enlightenment, the moment when a person directly perceives the true nature of things without intellectual analysis or explanation. The role of the teacher and the student. The Buddha's recognition of Mahakassapa's understanding is also symbolic of the relationship between teacher and student in Buddhism. A true teacher imparts wisdom not only through teaching but by creating an environment for direct experience. The student, in turn, must be open to receiving and directly perceiving that wisdom, as Mahakassapa did. Mahakassapa's enlightenment. Mahakassapa's smile marks his enlightenment or his realization of the nature of the Dharma. His reaction to the flower shows that true wisdom arises from within. Enlightenment, in this context, is not something to be intellectually grasped, but something that is already within every person, waiting to be realized. His smile was a natural expression of his inner awakening to the truth. In this story, the Buddha points directly to the heart of the matter, where the ultimate truth cannot be captured by ordinary language. The flower sermon remains a key teaching in Zen Buddhism and continues to inspire practitioners to seek the truth within themselves, beyond intellectual knowledge and concepts, and to experience the world directly, just as Mahakassapa did in that moment of silent enlightenment. 3. The farmer and his troubles. Once upon a time, in a quiet village surrounded by lush fields and peaceful hills, there lived a hard-working farmer. Though he toiled day and night to provide for his family, the farmer always seemed unhappy. His crops sometimes failed, his livestock occasionally wandered away, and his neighbors often annoyed him. He carried a constant burden of worries and frustrations. One day, the farmer heard that the Buddha was visiting a nearby village. Known for his wisdom and compassion, the Buddha attracted people from all walks of life, all seeking guidance and solace. The farmer decided to visit the Buddha in hopes of finding a solution to his troubles. When he arrived, he found the Buddha sitting under a large tree, surrounded by disciples and villagers. The atmosphere was serene, and the Buddha's presence radiated peace. The farmer approached the Buddha and bowed respectfully. "Revered one," the farmer said, "I am beset with troubles. My crops sometimes fail, and I worry about feeding my family. My animals often wander off, and I must spend hours searching for them. My neighbors are difficult, and my children don't always listen to me. I work hard, but there is always something to worry about. What can I do to rid myself of all these troubles?" The Buddha listened attentively, his serene expression unchanging. Then, with a gentle smile, he responded, "I cannot help you with your troubles." The farmer was taken aback. "But revered one, you are known for your wisdom. If you cannot help me, then who can?" The Buddha continued, "Everyone has troubles. Every person in this world carries at least 83 problems at any given time. Sometimes crops fail, animals get lost, neighbors are difficult, and loved ones may not behave as we wish. These are the 83 problems of life." The farmer was confused. "What do you mean? Are you saying I must live with these problems forever?" The Buddha nodded gently. "Yes. As long as you live, you will have 83 problems. Some may go away, but others will replace them. This is the nature of life." The farmer grew frustrated. "Then what is the point of seeking wisdom if you cannot help me with my problems?" The Buddha smiled again and said, "While I cannot help you get rid of your 83 problems, I can help you with your 84th problem." The farmer frowned. "What is my 84th problem?" The Buddha looked at him with deep compassion and replied, "Your 84th problem is that you think you should have no problems." The farmer fell silent, reflecting on the Buddha's words. He realized that he had spent so much time resisting and lamenting his troubles that he had missed the peace that comes from accepting life as it is. At that moment, he understood that his problems were not the source of his suffering. It was his constant struggle against them. With a newfound sense of clarity, the farmer bowed deeply to the Buddha. "Thank you, revered one," he said. "I will try to embrace my life's problems and all." The farmer returned to his village with a lighter heart. Though his work and challenges remained the same, his perspective had shifted. He found peace not in solving all his problems, but in accepting them as a natural part of life. His neighbors noticed the change in him and began to admire his calm demeanor. Soon, his children and friends began to ask him for advice, and the farmer shared the wisdom he had learned from the Buddha. Moral of the story. The story of the farmer and his troubles teaches us that life is inherently full of challenges, but suffering arises when we resist or try to eliminate them. True peace comes from accepting the natural difficulties of life and letting go of the belief that we should live without problems. Wisdom lies in letting go. The greatest wisdom is learning to live in harmony with life's imperfections and finding peace within. This timeless Buddhist parable reminds us to shift our perspective and embrace life's ups and downs with grace and understanding. 4. The Buddha and the Hungry Tigress. In one of his past lives, the Bodhisattva, the being destined to become the Buddha, was born as a prince in a royal family. He lived a life of luxury, but his heart was always filled with compassion for all living beings, especially animals and those in need. One day, while traveling through a forest with his retinue, the Bodhisattva and his companions came across a starving tigress. She had been searching for food for days, but had not been able to catch anything. The tigress was weak, her bones visible beneath her fur. She had several hungry cubs who were crying out for food. Seeing this heartbreaking sight, the Bodhisattva was filled with great compassion. He understood that the tigress was not only suffering from hunger, but also her cubs. He could not bear to see them in such pain. The prince immediately realized that the only way he could help was to offer himself food for the tigress and her cubs. His selflessness was an embodiment of the highest form of compassion. He turned to his followers and said, "I will offer myself to the tigress so that she and her cubs may live." The Bodhisattva then laid himself down in front of the tigress, offering his life. He spoke gently to her, "Take my life, for I would rather give myself to you than see you and your cubs die of hunger. May this sacrifice save you from suffering." As the tigress began to approach, something miraculous happened. The tigress, sensing the pure compassion radiating from the Bodhisattva, hesitated. Her hunger was intense, but she was moved by his selfless act. She did not immediately attack him. At that moment, the Bodhisattva's compassion was so powerful that it caused a miracle. The tigress could not bring herself to harm him. Instead, she seemed to feel the deep love and understanding emanating from the prince. She relaxed and retreated from his body. The tigress and her cubs no longer needed to harm the Bodhisattva. His act of compassion had transformed the situation. As a result, the tigress and her cubs were freed from hunger, and the prince, though willing to sacrifice his life, was miraculously saved. The powerful energy of love and compassion that he embodied protected him. Moral of the story. The story of the Buddha and the hungry tigress is a beautiful example of the Bodhisattva's compassion and his willingness to go to any lengths to help others. Through his act of self-sacrifice, the Bodhisattva shows us how to embody the highest ideals of compassion, love, and selflessness. This tale reminds us that through acts of love and kindness, we can transcend suffering and bring peace to the world, even in the most dire of circumstances. 5. The Buddha and the Snake. One day, as the Buddha was traveling with his disciples, they arrived at a village near the edge of a forest. A young man from the village had heard of the Buddha's teachings and was determined to test him. He did not believe in the Buddha's message of compassion and nonviolence, and he thought he could expose the Buddha as a hypocrite. This young man owned a venomous snake, which he kept in a basket. He decided to use the snake in his plan. He approached the Buddha and said, "Master, I hear you speak of kindness and nonviolence, but I want to know if you practice what you preach. I will show you this snake, and if you truly believe in your teachings, you will not react with fear or anger." The Buddha calmly looked at the snake in the young man's hands and replied, "I do not fear your snake, nor do I react with hatred or violence. I do not wish harm upon any being, no matter how dangerous or frightening it may seem." The young man, Wanting to test the Buddha further, placed the snake on the ground in front of him. "Let us see if you can practice what you preach," he said. "Will you remain calm, or will you lash out in anger when faced with danger?" At that moment, the snake, disturbed by the crowd, began to hiss and coil itself, preparing to strike. The young man stood eagerly by, waiting to see how the Buddha would respond. However, instead of reacting with fear or anger, the Buddha extended his hand toward the snake calmly and compassionately. He spoke gently to the snake. "I do not wish to harm you. I see that you, too, are suffering in this world. I do not want you to strike. I wish for you to live peacefully." The snake, sensing the Buddha's calm presence and hearing his gentle words, seemed to relax. It stopped hissing, uncurling itself, and retreated into the forest. The Buddha then turned to the young man and said, "You see, the true power lies in compassion, not fear or aggression. Just as I did not respond to the snake with violence, so should we respond to all living beings with understanding, patience, and love." The young man was astonished. He had expected the Buddha to show fear or anger, but instead, the Buddha had remained peaceful and non-reactive, demonstrating the power of compassion over fear. Realizing the depth of the Buddha's wisdom, the young man asked to become a disciple and learn more about the Buddha's teachings. Moral of the story. The story of the Buddha and the snake illustrates the Buddha's profound wisdom and his ability to respond to hostility with compassion and peace. It teaches us that the way to overcome anger, fear, and suffering is not through force or retaliation, but through understanding, patience, and love. By practicing these qualities, we can transform negative situations into opportunities for peace, just as the Buddha did with the snake. 6. The Buddha and the Broken Bowl. Once, as the Buddha was traveling with his disciples, they passed through a small village. The villagers were thrilled to meet the great teacher and offered him food, shelter, and various gifts. Among the offerings was a beautifully crafted bowl, which the Buddha graciously accepted. The bowl was a symbol of respect and admiration from one of his devoted followers, and the Buddha accepted it without attachment, appreciating the gesture but not becoming attached to the material gift. The bowl became a part of the Buddha's daily life as he journeyed. Over time, however, it began to show signs of wear. One day, while the Buddha and his disciples were resting in the forest, an accident occurred. The bowl was knocked over and shattered into pieces. When the disciples saw that the Buddha's bowl was broken, they were filled with concern and rushed to him, expressing their sorrow. "Master," they said, "your beautiful bowl has broken. How will you use it now?" With a calm and serene expression, the Buddha replied, "Why are you upset? The bowl is broken, but it does not matter. Everything is impermanent. Just as this bowl is subject to decay, so too are all things in the world." The disciples were surprised by the Buddha's reaction. They had expected him to be upset by the loss of the bowl, as it had been a valued possession. But the Buddha, free from attachment, remained unaffected by the loss. He continued, "The bowl was just a material object. Its purpose was to serve me during my travels. Now that it is broken, it has completed its purpose. I do not need to grieve. Just as the broken bowl will be replaced by another, so too are all things in life. Everything comes and goes. It is through understanding this impermanence that we can truly find peace." Moral of the story. The Buddha's reaction to the broken bowl teaches a powerful lesson about impermanence and attachment. Everything, including material possessions and our bodies, is subject to change. By embracing this truth and releasing our attachments, we can find greater peace and contentment. The Buddha's calm response reminds us to focus on what truly matters: our spiritual growth, mindfulness, and inner peace. 7. The story of Angulimala, the bandit. Angulimala was born as a young man named Ahimsa, which means the one who harms no one. He was a scholar, kind-hearted, and gentle, living in a peaceful village. Ahimsa was extremely intelligent and dedicated to his studies, becoming a promising student of a renowned teacher. However, his teacher grew jealous of his brilliance and sought to destroy him. In a cruel attempt to ruin Ahimsa, the teacher falsely accused him of wrongdoings and expelled him from the school. Devastated, Ahimsa wandered, seeking solace and meaning. Eventually, he came upon a group of bandits who led him astray. They convinced him that the only way to regain his honor and power was through violence. Now consumed with anger, Ahimsa made a fateful decision. He adopted the name Angulimala, which means finger garland, because he began killing people and collecting a finger from each victim to make a garland. His actions became so brutal and widespread that he was feared and despised by the entire region. Angulimala killed 999 people in his relentless pursuit of completing his garland of 1,000 fingers. As Angulimala's killing spree continued, the local rulers and people became terrified. The king sent soldiers and hunters, but none could stop him. Word of Angulimala's bloodshed spread, and his reputation as a fearsome murderer reached even the most distant places. Meanwhile, Lord Buddha, who had already attained enlightenment, was traveling through the same region. He had heard of Angulimala's crimes, and knowing the deep suffering Angulimala had caused, set out to find him, not to punish him, but to show him the way to redemption. As Lord Buddha walked through the forest, Angulimala, who was hiding among the trees, saw him approaching. Angulimala had killed so many that he had become a truly terrifying figure. Yet the Buddha moved with calmness, serenity, and fearlessness. Angulimala, curious and astonished at the sight of someone so unafraid, decided to chase after him. He ran toward the Buddha, but no matter how fast Angulimala ran, he could not catch up with Buddha, who was walking peacefully at his own pace. After a long while, Angulimala called out, "Stop, monk, stop." He believed he was faster than Buddha, yet the Buddha continued walking slowly, unaffected by his cries. Finally, Lord Buddha turned and spoke to him calmly. "I have stopped, Angulimala. It is you who are still running." This profound statement had a deep effect on Angulimala. He had spent his entire life running from the pain, fear, and anger within himself. He had been running toward violence, hatred, and greed. Now, hearing Buddha's words, he realized that he had never truly stopped, and his inner turmoil had caused him to hurt so many people. In that moment, Angulimala saw the Buddha's deep compassion and wisdom. He fell to his knees and begged for forgiveness. He asked the Buddha, "Is it possible for someone like me, someone who has done so much harm, to ever find peace?" Lord Buddha, with great compassion, replied, "Yes, Angulimala, you can still change. No matter how deep your past sins may be, If you truly wish to change, you can find peace. It is not too late for you. Filled with sorrow for his past actions, Angulimala took refuge in the Buddha's teachings and asked to become a disciple. The Buddha accepted him, and Angulimala, renouncing his violent ways, embraced a new life of compassion and mindfulness. Angulimala's transformation was profound. He became one of the Buddha's disciples and dedicated himself to the path of righteousness. He shaved his head, donned the robes of a monk, and followed the Buddhist teachings. Angulimala's remorse for his past actions was genuine, and he worked hard to purify his mind and actions. Though some people in the village could not forget his past and still feared him, Angulimala remained peaceful and resolute in his new life. He spent his time meditating, reflecting on the suffering he had caused, and helping others. His past reputation no longer defined him. One day, while walking through the village as a monk, some villagers recognized him. Out of fear, they started shouting at him and throwing stones. They called him a murderer and a criminal. Angulimala, however, remained calm and unfazed. He did not retaliate or become angry. Instead, he turned to the Buddha and asked, "Master, I am now a monk, yet the villagers still fear me and scorn me. What should I do?" The Buddha replied, "If a person throws a stone at you and you do not pick it up, who does the stone belong to? It belongs to the person who threw it. Similarly, if people throw insults at you and you do not accept them, they belong to the ones who insulted you." This teaching helped Angulimala understand that he no longer needed to hold on to the hatred or fear others had toward him. His transformation was internal, and he was at peace with himself. Angulimala lived the remainder of his life as a monk, fully committed to the path of enlightenment. He eventually attained arahantship, the highest level of spiritual attainment in Buddhism, where one is free from all defilements and attachments. In his final days, Angulimala was calm and serene. He reflected on his past, deeply grateful for the opportunity to be transformed through the Buddha's compassion. He died in peace, leaving behind a legacy of profound redemption. Moral of the story: the story of Angulimala is one of the most powerful teachings in Buddhism, illustrating the potential for transformation within everyone. No matter how dark a person's past may be, redemption is possible through wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness. No one is beyond redemption. The story shows that even the most heinous criminal can change if they sincerely wish to do so. Compassion, forgiveness, and the desire for inner peace can lead to transformation. The power of the Buddha's compassion, his unconditional love and understanding, helped Angulimala realize the possibility of change and peace. Buddha's compassion reached even the darkest parts of Angulimala's heart. Self-reflection and renunciation of harmful ways are key to finding peace and forgiveness. Angulimala's journey emphasizes the importance of embracing the path of peace and seeking forgiveness, both for oneself and others. In the end, Angulimala's life became a powerful reminder that it is never too late to turn away from harm and begin the path toward liberation and peace. 8. The story of Lord Buddha and the golden fish. Once upon a time, in a peaceful river that flowed through a dense forest, a beautiful golden fish lived. Known for its radiant scales and graceful swimming, the golden fish was an embodiment of freedom and beauty, living without a care in the world. It was admired by the animals, birds, and even humans who lived nearby. One day, a fisherman, who made his living by catching fish in the river, cast his net into the waters where the golden fish swam. After a long wait, he felt a strong pull on the net. Excited about his catch, he hurried to pull it up, and to his astonishment, he saw the golden fish trapped inside. However, the fisherman, although moved by the fish's plea, had a plan. He intended to sell the golden fish to the king, knowing that the king would reward him handsomely for such a rare catch. As the fisherman was preparing to take the fish to the palace, a group of monks came upon him. The monks had been traveling through the forest and noticed the struggle of the golden fish. Among them was Lord Buddha, who had been walking along the path and had seen the commotion. Buddha, seeing the fisherman about to take the golden fish, approached and asked what was going on. The fisherman explained that he had caught the fish and was planning to sell it to the king. Lord Buddha, who had great compassion for all living beings, looked at the golden fish with kindness and said, "This fish, like all living creatures, wishes to be free. Its life is its own. Let it go, and in doing so, you will receive a far greater reward." The fisherman, surprised by the Buddha's words, asked, "But if I let it go, what will I gain in return?" Buddha replied, "By releasing this fish, you free yourself from greed and attachment. You will gain peace of mind, and blessings will come to you in ways you cannot yet understand. There is more to life than material gain." After some contemplation, the fisherman decided to release the golden fish. As soon as the fish was set free, it leaped joyfully back into the river. The fish swam in circles, its golden scales shining even brighter under the sun, as if expressing its gratitude through its movements. Lord Buddha smiled and said, "See, the fish is free, and in its freedom, it brings joy to the river. When we release our attachments and desires, we too experience true freedom, and our hearts become light." As the fisherman walked away, he felt a sense of peace in his heart. He had chosen compassion over greed, and the rewards of that decision were not just material, they were spiritual. Years passed, and the fisherman's life took a turn for the better. He was no longer consumed by the need to gain wealth, but was instead content with the simple joys of life. The blessings that came to him were abundant, but they were not the riches he had once sought. Instead, they were the peace and happiness that come from living in harmony with the world. Moral of the story. The story of Lord Buddha and the golden fish teaches several important lessons. Buddha showed compassion towards all beings, including animals, and advocated for the release of the fish, emphasizing the value of life. The fisherman's decision to release the golden fish teaches the importance of letting go of attachment to material gain and greed. The fish's return to the river symbolizes the freedom that comes from releasing desires and living following the natural flow of life. The fisherman's life became more fulfilling not through wealth, but through spiritual peace and wisdom. This story encapsulates the essence of Buddhist teachings, where true happiness is not found in the pursuit of material wealth, but in compassion, wisdom, and attachment. 9. The story of the Buddha and the robe of gratitude. One day, during the Buddha's travels, he arrived at a small village and decided to rest there with his disciples. The villagers, hearing of the Buddha's wisdom and compassion, came to pay their respects, bringing food and other offerings. Among the villagers was a poor man named Kalana who admired the Buddha deeply but had nothing to offer. Kalana, who had lived in poverty his whole life, was a humble man with few possessions. All he owned was a simple, tattered robe he wore every day. But his heart was filled with love and gratitude for the Buddha, and he desperately wanted to show his respect and devotion, even though he had nothing to give. That evening, as the Buddha sat with his disciples, Kalana approached him with a shy smile. With great humility, he bowed before the Buddha, removed his only robe, and offered it to him as a gift. The Buddha, seeing the purity of Kalana's heart and the sacrifice he was making, took the worn, patched robe with reverence and grace. Though the robe was simple and old, the Buddha saw it as a precious gift of gratitude and sincerity. Smiling gently, the Buddha addressed his disciples. "Do you see this robe that has been offered to me by Kalana? Though it is simple and worn, it is given with a heart full of gratitude and respect." True generosity is not about the material value of what we give, but the love and sincerity with which we give it. He continued, "Kalana has given freely from what little he has, not for praise or recognition, but out of genuine gratitude. This is the spirit of true giving." The Buddha then decided to wear Kalana's robe for the remainder of his time in the village, honoring the man's pure-hearted gift. The other villagers were moved by Kalana's act of kindness and by the Buddha's acceptance of it. Inspired by this display of gratitude and humility, many villagers began to adopt a more generous and compassionate way of life. Seeing the happiness and transformation this act of gratitude brought, the Buddha encouraged his disciples, "When we live with gratitude, we discover true wealth within ourselves. Just as Kalana has given me this robe with a grateful heart, we should all cultivate a spirit of gratitude in our own lives. In doing so, we realize that we have much to give, regardless of how little we may possess." Moral of the story: the Buddha and the robe of gratitude teaches us that the true value of giving lies in the intention and sincerity behind it, rather than the material worth of the gift itself. Gratitude and generosity are qualities that can be practiced by everyone, regardless of wealth or status. 10. The story of the blind men and the elephant. In ancient times, a powerful king invited a group of blind men from his kingdom to his palace. The king wanted to show them an elephant, an animal they had heard about but never encountered. He thought it would be interesting to see how each blind man described the elephant, so he instructed his attendants to lead each man to a different part of the animal. The first blind man reached out and touched the elephant's massive side. "An elephant is like a sturdy wall," he said. The second blind man, who had felt the elephant's tusk, disagreed. "No, an elephant is sharp and smooth like a spear," he insisted. The third blind man, who was touching the elephant's trunk, chimed in, "You are both mistaken. An elephant is like a long, flexible snake." The fourth man, who had wrapped his arms around the elephant's leg, shook his head and said, "It's clear to me that an elephant is like a tree trunk." The fifth blind man, feeling the elephant's wide flapping ear, exclaimed, "An elephant is definitely like a fan." Finally, the sixth blind man, who held the elephant's tail, disagreed with all of them, declaring, "This animal is nothing but a rope." Each blind man was convinced that his own experience was correct and that the others were wrong. They began to argue loudly, each one sure that he knew the true nature of the elephant. The noise grew, and soon the king intervened to restore order. Smiling, the king said, "My friends, each of you touched a different part of the elephant, and each of you is partly right. The elephant has all of these characteristics that you described, yet it is more than any single part. Each of you experienced only one aspect, but the whole truth is beyond what any of you perceived individually." Hearing this, the blind men fell silent, realizing that they had each seen only a fragment of the elephant and that their limited perspectives had led to misunderstanding. When the Buddha told the story, he used it to illustrate a profound truth about human understanding. He explained to his disciples, in life, people see things from different viewpoints, shaped by their own experiences and perceptions. Each person holds a part of the truth, yet none can see the entire picture alone. Wisdom comes from realizing that others may see things we cannot, and by listening to and learning from each other, we gain a fuller understanding of reality. Moral of the story: the parable of the blind men and the elephant teaches us about the nature of perception and the limitations of individual understanding. In Buddhism, it serves as a reminder of humility, open-mindedness, and the need to recognize our partial views of reality. By respecting and learning from other perspectives, we can move closer to a more complete understanding of truth. This story encourages us to set aside rigid beliefs and approach life with an open heart and mind. It highlights the importance of compassion and empathy as we come to appreciate that every person's viewpoint contributes to the larger whole. 11. The story of the Buddha and the beggar. One day, the Buddha was sitting and teaching his disciples in a peaceful grove when a beggar approached him. The beggar was dressed in tattered clothes. His body was thin and frail, and his face reflected years of hardship. He had heard of the Buddha's compassion and wisdom and thought that perhaps the Buddha could offer him something valuable. The beggar bowed before the Buddha and said, "Oh, blessed one, I am poor and have nothing in this world. Can you give me something to relieve my suffering?" The Buddha looked at him with kindness and replied, "Of course. But first, tell me, what do you already have?" The beggar, somewhat puzzled, answered, "I have nothing, blessed one. I own no land, no money, no possessions." The Buddha smiled gently and asked, "Do you have your eyes?" The beggar responded, "Yes, of course." The Buddha continued, "Then would you be willing to give me your eyes in exchange for a large sum of gold?" The beggar was shocked. "No, blessed one, I could never give up my eyes. They allow me to see the world." The Buddha nodded and asked, "What about your hands? Would you trade them for a palace and servants to wait on you?" The beggar shook his head, realizing where the Buddha was leading him. "No, I would not. My hands are precious to me." The Buddha continued, "And your legs? Would you part with them for a kingdom?" Again, the beggar replied, "No, I would not." The Buddha looked at him with deep compassion and said, "You see, you may not have material possessions, but you are not poor. You possess priceless treasures: your eyes, your hands, your legs, and your mind. These gifts allow you to experience life, to work, to create, and to grow. True poverty is not the absence of material wealth, but the inability to appreciate and use what you already have." The beggar sat in silence, absorbing the Buddha's words. He had never thought of his body and mind as treasures. He had always measured his wealth by material things and had seen himself as poor and lacking. The Buddha continued, "Happiness and contentment do not come from possessions, but from realizing the value of what you already possess. When you learn to appreciate and use your gifts wisely, you will find a wealth that no one can take from you." The beggar felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. For the first time, he understood that he was not as poor as he had thought. He thanked the Buddha for opening his eyes to the true wealth within himself and left with a newfound perspective on life. Moral of the story. The story of the Buddha and the beggar teaches us that true wealth is not measured by material possessions, but by the ability to appreciate the gifts we already have: our health, our senses, our mind, and our capacity to love and grow. This story reminds us that contentment and happiness come from within, not from external things. When we shift our focus from what we lack to what we have, we discover a richness that cannot be taken away. It encourages gratitude and self-awareness, helping us recognize the value in ourselves and the blessings we already possess. 12. The story of the rich man and his wishes. Once, in a prosperous village, there lived a wealthy man renowned for his immense fortune and luxurious lifestyle. He owned grand estates, fertile lands, and treasures beyond measure. Yet, despite all his riches, he felt a profound emptiness inside. No matter how much he accumulated, he was never satisfied and always yearned for more. He believed that if only he could fulfill a few more wishes, he would finally find happiness. One day, the man heard that a wise monk was visiting the village. This monk was said to possess deep insights into life's mysteries and could help people discover true peace and happiness. Curious and hopeful, the rich man decided to seek the monk's guidance. When he arrived, he found the monk sitting calmly under a tree. Bowing respectfully, the rich man spoke. "Revered monk, I have everything a man could wish for: wealth, status, and luxury, but I am still not happy. There is an emptiness that I cannot fill, no matter how much I possess. I long to be truly happy. Can you help me?" The monk looked at him with understanding and replied, "If you truly wish to find happiness, I can grant you 3 wishes. But remember, these wishes are not for material desires. They are meant to guide you toward true peace. Think carefully before you make each wish." The rich man was overjoyed, believing that these wishes would finally bring him the happiness he sought. After a moment of thought, he made his first wish. "I wish to be free from all my worries and troubles," he said confidently. The monk nodded and closed his eyes in silent meditation. "Your wish is granted," he said softly. "Go home and observe your mind over the next few days." The rich man returned home, hopeful. But to his surprise, he found that no matter what he did, his mind still generated thoughts of worry and concern. Despite his wish for freedom from worry, the anxieties lingered, resurfacing whenever challenges arose. Frustrated, he returned to the monk. "Monk, I wish to be free of my worries, but they have not left me," the man said. The monk replied gently, "Worries do not vanish simply because you wish them away. True freedom from worry comes from understanding and accepting life's uncertainties without clinging to outcomes." The rich man reflected on the monk's words and then made his second wish. "I wish to be free of my desires. It is my desires that make me restless and unsatisfied." Again, the monk closed his eyes and granted the wish. The rich man returned home, determined to let go of his desires. But soon, he found that his longing for wealth, success, and status didn't disappear so easily. His desires resurfaced whenever he encountered something new to acquire or achieve. Angry and disappointed, he returned to the monk. "Monk, I wish to be free of my desires, but they still trouble me," he said. The monk smiled kindly. "Desires, like worries, are a part of the human mind. They will not vanish through force. You must understand the nature of desire and see it as impermanent. Only then will you find peace with it." The rich man sat quietly, deep in thought. He now had one wish left, and he was determined to make it wisely. After a long silence, he spoke. "For my third wish, I wish to understand myself. I wish to see why I am restless and never content, despite all I have." The monk's eyes sparkled with approval. "Now you have made a wise wish. The path to true happiness begins with self-understanding." The monk then guided the man in meditation, teaching him how to observe his thoughts, desires, and worries without attachment. He showed him how to look inward and understand the nature of his mind. Over time, the rich man began to realize that his restlessness stemmed from his attachments and his inability to accept life's impermanence. He understood that the emptiness he felt could not be filled by material possessions, but by understanding and inner peace. Gradually, he learned to let go of his need to control everything and found contentment within himself. The rich man no longer chased after wealth and status, for he had discovered a deeper satisfaction in his heart. He returned to the monk, bowing deeply in gratitude. "Thank you, wise monk," he said humbly. "I now understand that true happiness does not come from fulfilling every desire, but from knowing and accepting myself." Moral of the story. The story of the rich man and his wishes teaches us that happiness and peace do not come from external possessions or fulfilling endless desires. True contentment comes from self-understanding and acceptance. Only by looking within and letting go of attachments can we find lasting peace and fulfillment. This story reminds us to seek happiness within, rather than through material wealth, guiding us toward a deeper inner contentment and tranquility. 13. The monk and the tree. In a remote monastery nestled high in the mountains, there was a young monk who had recently joined a community of monks devoted to meditation and spiritual practice. Eager to attain enlightenment, he threw himself into his studies and daily meditations with great enthusiasm. Yet, despite his dedication, he often found himself overwhelmed by impatience, and his mind would frequently wander, distracting him from his practice. One day, feeling especially frustrated with his lack of progress, the young monk approached the abbot of the monastery for guidance. "Master," he asked, "how long will it take me to reach enlightenment? I've been meditating and studying diligently, yet I feel no closer to understanding the truth." The abbot, a wise and compassionate man, listened carefully to the young monk's concerns. With a gentle smile, he decided to teach him a lesson in patience and inner growth. "Come with me," the abbot said. "I want to show you something that may help you understand the path to enlightenment." The abbot led the young monk through the serene forest that surrounded the monastery until they came upon a large, ancient tree. Its branches stretched wide, providing shade and shelter to many creatures. The abbot pointed to the tree and asked, "Do you see this tree?" How long do you think it took for it to grow to this size and strengths?" The young monk studied the tree, taking in its thick trunk and expansive canopy. "It must have taken many years to grow to this size, master," he replied. "But what does this have to do with my question?" The abbot smiled warmly and explained, "This tree did not grow overnight, nor did it rush to become what it is today. It grew slowly, day by day, reaching deeper into the earth for nourishment and extending its branches to the sky. It withstood storms, droughts, and seasons of hardship, yet it continued to grow. Its strength and size are the result of steady, patient growth." The young monk listened intently, and the abbot continued, "Enlightenment, like the growth of this tree, cannot be rushed. It requires patience, resilience, and dedication. Just as the tree's roots must grow deep to support its branches, your inner growth must take time. You cannot force wisdom or understanding to come. They will arrive naturally as you cultivate patience and let go of your attachment to immediate results." Then, the abbot invited the young monk to sit beneath the tree and meditate, encouraging him to observe the calm presence of the tree. "Notice how the tree stands peacefully and steadfastly, unaffected by the world around it," the abbot said. As the young monk sat in meditation, a sense of deep peace began to fill him. He realized that enlightenment was not something to be chased, but rather a natural outcome of steady, patient practice. Just as the tree grew at its own pace, he too would grow and evolve in his own time. From that day forward, the young monk approached his practice with renewed patience and acceptance. No longer did he rush or judge his progress. He understood that, like the tree, his growth would happen when the time was right. And in that understanding, he found a new peace. Moral of the story: the story of the monk and the tree teaches the importance of patience and steady growth on the spiritual path. Just as a tree grows slowly, reaching deeper into the earth for strength, so must we cultivate patience and allow ourselves to grow naturally. Enlightenment and inner peace are not goals to be forced. They come as a result of dedication, resilience, and acceptance of life's natural pace. This story reminds us that personal growth and wisdom are gradual processes. True understanding and enlightenment develop slowly, and by releasing the need for immediate results, we find deeper peace and joy in the journey itself. 14. The story of the generous king. In ancient India, there was a king who ruled with great compassion and wisdom. Known throughout his kingdom for his generosity, he dedicated his reign to the welfare of his people. His wealth and power were not for his indulgence, but were used to help those in need, whether it was offering food, shelter, or financial support. The king believed it was his duty to serve others, and he gave freely, expecting nothing in return. One day, a wandering sage arrived at the palace. Hearing of the king's kindness, the sage decided to test whether the king's generosity was truly selfless. Disguised as a poor beggar, the sage approached the palace and requested an audience with the king. The king welcomed the beggar with open arms, offering him food, rest, and shelter without hesitation. The beggar expressed his gratitude and then asked, "Great king, you are known for your boundless generosity, but tell me, is there anything you would not give if someone asked for it?" The king replied with conviction, "I would give anything that is within my power to give. I hold nothing back if it serves the good of others." The beggar, still skeptical, decided to push further. "Then, noble king, I ask for your most precious possession, your life. Will you give it to me without a moment's hesitation?" The king, without a hint of doubt, nodded and said, "If my life can serve a greater purpose, I would gladly give it. What is a king, if not a servant to his people? My life is no more valuable than the lives of those I serve." The beggar, now astonished by the king's selflessness, pressed on, "If that is your wish, then prove it by surrendering yourself to me." The king agreed, ordering his guards to bring forth a ceremonial blade, preparing himself to face death with dignity. As the people of the kingdom heard of their king's intent, they gathered at the palace, weeping and pleading for him to reconsider. They could not bear the thought of losing such a noble and kind-hearted ruler, but the king remained resolute. "My dear people," the king spoke to the crowd, "I have lived my life to serve you. If my life is required for your well-being, then it is my honor to give it." True generosity knows no limits. As the king prepared for the sacrifice, the beggar dropped his disguise, revealing his true identity as the sage. Smiling with admiration, the sage said, "Noble king, you have proven yourself to be the most generous and selfless ruler. I did not want your life. I only wanted to test whether your heart was free from selfishness. You have shown me that your compassion is boundless, and you are willing to sacrifice even your life for the sake of others. May your name be remembered forever." Moral of the story. The story of the generous king teaches the virtue of selflessness and true generosity. The king's willingness to give everything, even his life, shows that genuine compassion transcends personal gain. True generosity is not about giving only what is convenient, but about offering even that which is most precious when needed. This story inspires us to approach others with kindness and generosity, reminding us that true nobility comes from a heart willing to give selflessly. The king's example reveals that true leadership and love for others are rooted in self-sacrifice and compassion. 15. The fasting monk and compassion. In a quiet forest monastery, there lived a monk renowned for his strict ascetic practices. His dedication to fasting and meditation was admired by many, and he believed that by abstaining from all worldly pleasures and restricting himself to the bare minimum, he would attain enlightenment. His practice of fasting was extreme. He would go for days without food, only drinking water to sustain himself. Though his body grew thin and weak, he remained resolute, thinking that denying his physical needs would free him from all desires. One day, as the monk sat in meditation near the monastery entrance, a young boy walked by carrying a small bundle of food. The boy noticed the monk's frail appearance and stopped, concern washing over his face. He approached the monk and asked, "Sir, why are you so thin and tired? Have you not eaten?" The monk replied, "I am fasting to free myself from worldly desires. Food is a source of attachment, and by abstaining from it, I hope to reach enlightenment." The boy, full of innocence and compassion, looked down at the bundle of food he was carrying. It was his family's meal, but his heart ached for the monk. Without a second thought, he offered the monk a portion, saying, "Please have some of this. It may not be much, but it will give you strength." The monk was taken aback, hesitant. His mind was torn between his practice of self-denial and the boy's genuine act of kindness. But as he looked into the boy's earnest eyes, he felt something stir within him, a warmth he hadn't felt in a long time. It was a reminder of human connection, a spark of compassion that transcended his solitary pursuit. Overcome by the boy's kindness, the monk accepted a small portion and ate. As he did, he felt a renewed energy filling his body, but more importantly, a softening in his heart. At that moment, he realized that in his intense focus on personal enlightenment, he had forgotten the value of compassion and connection with others. The monk pondered deeply, reflecting on his practices. He understood that while self-discipline was essential, so was compassion for others and oneself. True enlightenment, he realized, was not found through extreme self-denial alone, but through a balance of discipline and kindness. Compassion was not a distraction from his spiritual journey, but a necessary and powerful force that guided him along the way. Later, the monk went to the Buddha to share his insight and seek guidance. The Buddha listened with a kind smile and then spoke. Just as a bird needs 2 wings to fly, so does a seeker of truth need both wisdom and compassion. Discipline without compassion leads to rigidity, and compassion without discipline can lead to indulgence. Balance is the path to true enlightenment. The monk thanked the Buddha and, from that day forward, practiced his meditations with a balanced approach. He continued his path with newfound humility, accepting the kindness of others and sharing his own compassion in return. His heart, now open to both discipline and compassion, grew wiser and more peaceful with each passing day. Moral of the story: the fasting monk and compassion teaches that true spiritual growth requires a balance between discipline and compassion. Self-denial and strict practices alone are not enough. We must also embrace kindness and understanding for others and ourselves. This story reminds us that compassion is not a weakness, but a strength that guides us toward a more holistic and fulfilling enlightenment. It encourages a balanced approach to life, where self-discipline and empathy go hand in hand, helping us cultivate a deeper inner peace and genuine connection with others. 16. The Parable of the Poisoned Honey. One day, the Buddha gathered his disciples and began to speak about the nature of temptation and the hidden dangers that lie behind seemingly pleasurable experiences. He shared a parable to help them understand the importance of mindfulness and caution in all aspects of life. Imagine, the Buddha began, a hunter in the forest who wants to capture wild animals. He knows that animals are drawn to sweetness, so he places a small amount of honey on a leaf near a trail. But in his wisdom, he mixes a deadly poison into the honey. The honey appears inviting, sweet, and harmless, but hidden within it is a danger that the animals cannot see. As the Buddha spoke, the disciples listened carefully, their curiosity growing as they wondered where the story would lead. One day, a deer wandering through the forest stumbles upon the leaf with the honey. The Buddha continued. Drawn by the sweet scent, it approaches cautiously. The deer hesitates, unsure at first, but the aroma is so enticing that it decides to take a small lick. The taste is exquisite. For a brief moment, the deer experiences pure delight. The Buddha paused, allowing the image of the deer savoring the honey to sink deep into the minds of his disciples. But the pleasure is fleeting, he resumed. Within moments, the poison takes effect. The deer collapses and dies, unable to resist the temptation of the honey. The disciples sat in silence as the Buddha's words took root. He looked at them with compassion, then explained, "This honey is like the pleasures of the world. They seem sweet and satisfying, offering promises of happiness and comfort, but hidden within them is suffering. When we cling to these fleeting pleasures, we invite pain. Our desires grow, and we become trapped in an endless cycle of craving." One of the disciples raised his hand and asked, "Master, are all pleasures like this poisoned honey? Should we avoid them altogether?" The Buddha smiled gently and replied, "Not all pleasures are harmful, but one must approach them with mindfulness and awareness. To indulge in worldly pleasures without caution is like the deer falling into the hunter's trap. The mind becomes ensnared by attachments, and eventually it harms us." He continued, "The wise person enjoys life's sweetness, but does not cling to it. When we experience pleasure without attachment, we can fully appreciate it and let it go without regret. But when we become addicted to that pleasure, it turns into poison. The temporary satisfaction fades, and we are left with suffering." The disciples nodded, understanding the deeper meaning of the parable. The Buddha had shown them that the key was not to avoid pleasure entirely, but to remain vigilant and not become attached to it. They realized that everything in life is impermanent. The Buddha concluded, "Practice moderation and approach life with mindfulness. Enjoy the sweetness of life's moments without clinging to them. Remember, true happiness is not found in fleeting pleasures, but in inner peace, wisdom, and liberation from craving." Moral of the story: the parable of the poisoned honey teaches the importance of mindfulness in how we approach worldly pleasures. Pleasurable experiences can bring joy, but if we cling to them, they can lead to suffering and entrapment. This story reminds us to enjoy life's pleasures without attachment, recognize their temporary nature, and seek deeper peace beyond fleeting satisfaction. By practicing awareness, balance, and detachment, we can find a more fulfilling and peaceful path in life. 17. The Buddha and the Mirror. One day, a young monk approached the Buddha, his face clouded with frustration. Bowing deeply, he confessed, "Master, I've practiced diligently. I meditate, study, and strive to be pure. Yet, I'm constantly distracted by anger, jealousy, and pride. No matter how hard I try, these emotions keep rising within me. Why can't I escape them?" The Buddha listened quietly, his gaze filled with compassion. After a moment, he said, "Come with me." They walked together through a lush forest, sunlight filtering gently through the trees, until they reached a river. The Buddha stopped by a calm, clear pool at the river's edge and gestured for the monk to sit beside him. "Look into the water," the Buddha said. The monk leaned over and gazed at the still surface. "I see myself, Master," he replied, observing his reflection, crisp and serene like a polished mirror. The Buddha smiled. "Now, stir the water with your hand." The monk hesitated but followed the instruction, swirling his hand through the water. Ripples spread across the surface, breaking his reflection into a distorted, unrecognizable blur. "What do you see now?" the Buddha asked. The monk frowned. "I see nothing. My reflection is gone because the water is disturbed." The Buddha nodded. "Now, remove your hand and wait." The monk sat in silence, watching as the ripples slowly faded. Bit by bit, the water grew still again, and his reflection reappeared, clear and unbroken. The Buddha spoke softly. The mind is like this pool of water. When it is calm and undisturbed, it reflects reality as it truly is. But when it is agitated by emotions like anger, jealousy, or pride, it becomes cloudy, and you lose sight of your true self. The young monk listened intently as the Buddha continued, "Do not fight your emotions or try to force them away. This only stirs the water further. Instead, observe them with patience and compassion. Let them come, let them pass, and allow your mind to settle naturally. When the mind is still, your true nature will shine through, just as the water reflects your image when it is calm." At that moment, the monk understood. His struggle against his emotions was like stirring the water, creating more ripples instead of letting them fade. He realized that to find peace, he didn't need to force his emotions to disappear. He needed to let them settle naturally and without resistance. The Buddha concluded, "True wisdom and peace arise not from rejecting your emotions, but from understanding them. Like a mirror reflects only when it is clean and still, so too does the mind reveal the truth when it is free from turmoil." The monk bowed deeply, gratitude filling his heart. Renewed with understanding, he returned to his practice with a new perspective, one of patience, mindfulness, and acceptance. Moral of the story: the tale of the Buddha and the mirror teaches us that clarity and wisdom come from a calm and still mind. Emotions like anger and jealousy are natural, but when we fight or cling to them, we create inner turbulence. By practicing mindfulness and observing our emotions without judgment, we allow them to pass, letting the mind settle like ripples fading in water. This story reminds us that self-reflection, patience, and acceptance are the keys to inner peace and seeing our true selves. 18. The Tale of the Lost Ox. Once, in a peaceful monastery nestled in the mountains, there lived a young monk with unwavering devotion. He had spent years meditating, studying sacred teachings, and following his master's guidance with diligence. Yet, despite his efforts, a restlessness grew within him. He felt as though something essential was missing, an elusive piece of the puzzle that would unlock enlightenment. One day, unable to contain his frustration any longer, he approached his master. Bowing deeply, he confessed, "Master, I've dedicated myself to this path with all my heart. I've followed every instruction, meditated endlessly, and absorbed the teachings. Yet I feel no closer to enlightenment. Why is this happening?" The master, with a serene smile, gestured for the monk to sit. "Let me tell you a story," he said, his voice calm like the rustle of autumn leaves. "It is the story of a man and his lost ox." The monk listened intently as the master began. In a small village, there lived a farmer who cherished his ox. This ox was more than just a work companion. It was his trusted friend. One day, the ox wandered off into the forest and vanished. The farmer, feeling incomplete without his companion, began a desperate search. For days and nights, he roamed the fields, calling out for the ox, his heart heavy with worry. Then, one morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, he discovered tracks, clear imprints in the dirt. His heart leaped with hope. Following the tracks, he ventured deep into the forest, through rushing rivers, over steep hills, and into dense thickets. The journey was exhausting, and there were moments he wanted to give up. But the tracks kept him going, guiding him closer. Finally, after days of tireless searching, he caught sight of his beloved ox grazing peacefully in a meadow. Overwhelmed with relief and joy, he approached gently, careful not to startle it. Reuniting with the ox, the farmer felt whole again. He no longer carried the burden of searching or longing. What he had lost was now found. With the ox at his side, he returned home, his heart filled with a deep and abiding peace. The master paused, letting the story settle. Then, he turned to the young monk and said, "This ox represents your true nature, your inner self. At first, it may feel as though something vital is missing, and you search for it outside yourself. But as you progress in your practice, you begin to notice tracks, subtle signs, and insights pointing the way inward. The journey is not without challenges. There will be moments of frustration and doubt, just as the farmer faced rivers and hills. But with patience and perseverance, you will eventually catch sight of your true self. And when you do, you'll realize that it was never truly lost. It has always been there, waiting quietly for you to discover it. Enlightenment is not something to gain. It is a reunion with what has always been within you." The young monk sat in thoughtful silence. The master's words resonated deeply, and he began to see his frustrations in a new light. They were not obstacles, but part of the journey itself, a natural process of uncovering his true nature. "Thank you, Master," he said, bowing once more. Renewed with patience and determination, he returned to his practice, no longer in haste, but with trust in the process. Moral of the story: the tale of the lost ox reminds us that the search for inner peace and enlightenment is not about acquiring something new, but about rediscovering what has always been within us. Like the farmer searching for his ox, we may feel lost or frustrated at times, but these moments are part of the journey. With persistence and trust, we reconnect with our true selves, finding wholeness and peace. This story encourages us to look inward, teaching us that even when we feel lost, our inner truth is always within reach, patiently waiting to be found. 19. The Bamboo Grove and the Art of Patience. In the serene outskirts of Rajagaha, nestled between gentle hills and winding streams, lay the Bamboo Grove Monastery. It was a gift to the Buddha from King Bimbisara, a sanctuary of peace where tall, elegant bamboo whispered with the wind and tranquility seemed to float in the air. The monastery wasn't just a place of meditation. It was a haven for lessons in patience, wisdom, and compassion taught by the Buddha himself. On one such day, as the disciples rested beneath the soothing shade of the bamboo, a young monk approached the Buddha. His face was marked with frustration, his brow furrowed with unspoken struggle. Bowing respectfully, he shared his turmoil. "Master," he began, "I try to be patient, but I find it so difficult. I feel anger well up inside me when others, especially some monks, don't take their practice seriously. I want to grow, but their actions distract and irritate me. How can I cultivate patience when frustration keeps taking over?" The Buddha, always listening with deep compassion, smiled gently. He gestured to the bamboo grove around them and began to speak. "Once, in this very grove," he said, "there were two monks who practiced together. One was calm and steady, like a tree rooted deep in the earth. The other, though sincere in his efforts, was quick to anger and judgment. He constantly struggled to find peace. On a windy afternoon, as they meditated beneath the bamboo, the grove came alive with sound. The wind swayed the tall stalks, causing them to rustle and creak. The impatient monk grew irritated, his meditation shattered by the noise. He opened his eyes, glaring at the bamboo as if it had personally insulted him. "This noise is unbearable," he grumbled. "How can anyone meditate in such a racket?" He considered abandoning his spot for a quieter place. The patient monk, on the other hand, sat still, his face serene. After the meditation session ended, the impatient monk turned to him, his frustration still evident. "How could you remain so calm?" he demanded. "Doesn't the noise bother you?" The patient monk smiled and replied, "The wind blows and the bamboo sways. That is its nature. The sound exists, but whether it disturbs me is my choice. I cannot silence the wind, but I can quiet my mind. Patience isn't about waiting for the world to stop testing us. It's about mastering our reaction to it. By doing so, we find peace even amid chaos." The Buddha paused, letting the story sink in. Then he pointed to the bamboo swaying gently in the breeze. "Patience," he continued, "is much like this bamboo. When the wind blows, it bends gracefully, but does not break. It adapts without resistance, yet stands resilient. To be patient is not to be passive or weak. It is to possess quiet strength. It is the ability to bend without snapping under the weight of life's frustrations." The young monk listened intently, his heart beginning to understand what his mind had struggled with. The Buddha's words were like the gentle rustling of the bamboo, calming, yet filled with purpose. "Master," the monk said softly, "I think I see now. To be like the bamboo, I must stop fighting against the wind. I must learn to bend and sway without letting anger or irritation break me. I must accept the imperfections of others as I work on my own." The Buddha nodded, his serene smile reflecting the wisdom of ages. Moral of the story. The story of the bamboo grove reminds us that patience is not just waiting. It's a form of quiet resilience. Like the bamboo, which bends gracefully but never breaks, we too can adapt to life's disturbances without letting them shatter our peace. True patience lies not in wishing the world or others to change, but in transforming how we respond to challenges. By cultivating inner calm, we unlock the ability to face life's noise with grace and strength, finding stillness even in the storm. 20. The Parable of the Burning House. Once, the Buddha was teaching his followers about the urgency of seeking enlightenment and freeing oneself from the cycle of birth and death, known as samsara. To illustrate his message, he shared the parable of the burning house. In a small village, there was a wealthy man who had several young children. He loved his children dearly, but was often preoccupied with his work and possessions. One day, as the man was away from home, a terrible fire broke out, engulfing the house in flames. The fire spread quickly, and soon the entire house was ablaze. The man rushed back when he heard about the fire and found that his children were still inside, playing with their toys, completely unaware of the danger surrounding them. He called out to them, shouting, "Come out, children, the house is on fire. You must leave now." But the children, absorbed in their games, did not pay any attention to him or understand the danger they were in. Realizing that his warnings were not enough to convince them, the man decided to use a different approach. Knowing that his children loved playing with various types of toy carts, he called out to them, saying, "Children outside, I have wonderful carts for each of you, goat carts, deer carts, and ox carts. Come quickly, and you can have whichever one you like." Hearing this, the children became excited and immediately ran out of the burning house, eager to play with the promised carts. When they were safely outside, the father was filled with relief. He had successfully led them away from the fire and saved their lives. The children, however, looked around and asked, "Where are the carts you promised us?" The father, happy to see his children safe, brought out a beautiful, magnificent cart that far exceeded anything he had described. It was grand, adorned with jewels, much more splendid than they had imagined. He gave them this single, large cart, which delighted them and fulfilled their wishes far beyond their expectations. The Buddha explained the meaning of the parable to his disciples. The burning house represents samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and suffering in which people are trapped. The children symbolize all beings who remain unaware of their danger, distracted by worldly pleasures and attachments. The father represents the Buddha, who, out of compassion, seeks to lead beings to safety. The toy carts were a skillful means, upaya, used by the father to entice his children to leave the burning house. Similarly, the Buddha uses different teachings and methods to guide people according to their capacities and desires, helping them leave behind their attachments and find the path to enlightenment. The magnificent cart represents the ultimate reward of enlightenment, which surpasses anything that can be promised or imagined. Moral of the story. This story encourages us to recognize the urgency of spiritual practice and to seek liberation from suffering by letting go of the attachments to the toys that distract us in life. It also reminds us that the guidance offered by spiritual teachers may come in forms we do not immediately understand, but ultimately lead us to the lasting peace of enlightenment. Thank you so much for watching. If these stories resonated with you and helped bring some peace to your day, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Join our growing community and feel free to share your thoughts or your favorite story in the comments. Let's keep the conversation going and continue to support each other on this journey toward inner peace.